Question 1. Market research demonstrates a growing demand for Adventist University of Africa's programs, prompting a strategic review of admissions policies to potentially increase enrollment. The admissions committee is tasked with developing a framework for evaluating applicants that balances the need for growth with maintaining academic standards and ensuring student success. Which of the following approaches best aligns with responsible risk assessment and ethical admissions practices for the university? Option A. Prioritizing applicants who demonstrate the strongest potential for immediate financial contribution to the university, irrespective of their academic preparedness. Option B. Significantly lowering the minimum GPA requirement for all programs to attract a larger pool of applicants and meet ambitious enrollment targets. Option C. Implementing a holistic review process that considers academic transcripts, standardized test scores, where applicable, personal essays, letters of recommendation, and evidence of extracurricular involvement or leadership potential, alongside an assessment of the applicant's alignment with the university's values. Option D. Relying solely on historical academic performance data from previous institutions, without considering any other qualitative aspects of an applicant's profile. Correct answer is C. Implementing a holistic review process that considers academic transcripts, standardized test scores, where applicable, personal essays, letters of recommendation, and evidence of extracurricular involvement or leadership potential, alongside an assessment of the applicant's alignment with the university's values. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the university's strategic growth objectives with the ethical imperative of responsible risk management. The admissions committee must make informed decisions that align with the university's mission and academic standards, while also considering the potential impact of admitting students who may not be adequately prepared for the rigors of higher education. Careful judgment is required to avoid both overly restrictive admissions that hinder growth and overly lenient admissions that compromise academic quality and student success. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that considers multiple facets of a candidate's profile beyond just academic scores. This includes evaluating their potential for academic success based on a holistic review of their application, considering factors such as essays, recommendations, extracurricular activities, and any demonstrated resilience or unique talents. This approach aligns with the ethical principles of fairness and equity in admission, ensuring that all applicants are given a thorough and individualized evaluation. It also reflects a responsible approach to institutional sustainability by admitting students who are more likely to succeed in graduate, thereby contributing positively to the university's reputation and long-term viability. This aligns with the general principles of good governance and responsible institutional management expected of educational bodies. An approach that solely focuses on historical academic performance without considering other indicators of potential would be ethically flawed. It risks overlooking promising candidates who may have faced extenuating circumstances or who possess strengths not captured by traditional metrics. This could lead to a less diverse student body and a failure to identify individuals who could thrive at the university with appropriate support. An approach that prioritizes meeting enrollment targets above all else, even if it means lowering academic standards, would be professionally unacceptable. This would undermine the academic integrity of the university, potentially leading to higher dropout rates and a diminished reputation. It also fails to uphold the ethical duty to provide a quality education and support student success. A purely subjective approach based on personal biases or intuition, without a structured framework for evaluation, would also be problematic. This lacks transparency and fairness, and could lead to discriminatory practices, violating ethical principles of equal opportunity. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve establishing clear, objective, and fair admissions criteria that are regularly reviewed and updated. This process should incorporate a holistic review of applicants, considering a range of factors that predict success. Furthermore, it requires ongoing monitoring of student outcomes to assess the effectiveness of admissions policies and make necessary adjustments. Transparency in the admissions process and a commitment to diversity and inclusion are also crucial components of responsible decision-making. Question 2. The risk matrix shows potential threats to the Adventist University of Africa entrance exam. Which of the following represents the most comprehensive and proactive approach to managing these identified risks? Option A. waiting for risks to materialize and then addressing them as they arise. Option B, focusing solely on risks with the highest potential severity, regardless of their probability. Option C, listing all possible risks that could occur during the examination period. Option D, systematically identifying potential risks, analyzing their likelihood and impact, and developing mitigation strategies. The correct answer is D, systematically identifying potential risks, analyzing their likelihood and impact, and developing mitigation strategies. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate an understanding of risk assessment principles within the context of an academic institution's entrance examination process. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate method for evaluating potential risks to the integrity and fairness of the exam, rather than simply identifying risks themselves. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between a reactive approach and a proactive, systematic one that aligns with best practices in educational assessment and institutional governance. The correct approach involves systematically identifying, analyzing, and evaluating potential risks to the examination process. This approach is right because it aligns with the fundamental principles of risk management, which are crucial for ensuring the credibility and fairness of any assessment. By proactively identifying potential threats such as examination malpractice, technical failures, or administrative errors, and then assessing their likelihood and impact, the university can develop appropriate mitigation strategies. This systematic process is ethically sound, as it prioritizes the integrity of the examination and the fairness to all applicants, reflecting a commitment to academic excellence and due process, which are implicit expectations for any reputable educational institution. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on identifying risks without a plan for mitigation fails because it is incomplete. Risk assessment is not merely about listing potential problems. It is about understanding and managing them. Without a subsequent analysis of likelihood and impact, and the development of control measures, the identification of risks is an academic exercise with no practical value in safeguarding the examination. Another incorrect approach that involves reacting to risks only after they have occurred is fundamentally flawed. This reactive stance is contrary to the principles of effective risk management, which emphasizes proactive identification and prevention. Relying on a reactive approach compromises the integrity of the examination process, potentially leading to unfair outcomes for applicants and reputational damage to the university. It fails to uphold the ethical obligation to provide a secure and equitable testing environment. A further incorrect approach that prioritizes only the most severe risks without considering their likelihood is also problematic. While severity is important, a risk that is highly severe but extremely unlikely might not warrant the same immediate resources as a moderately severe risk that is highly probable. A balanced assessment considers both dimensions to allocate resources effectively for mitigation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a structured approach. First, define the scope of the assessment, in this case the entrance examination process. Second, identify potential risks. Third, analyze the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. Fourth, evaluate the risks to prioritize them. Fifth, develop and implement mitigation strategies. And finally, monitor and review the effectiveness of these strategies. This systematic process ensures that risks are managed comprehensively and ethically. Question 3. The control framework reveals that an applicant for the Adventist University of Africa entrance exam has submitted an incomplete application, with a crucial supporting document missing. The admissions committee must decide how to proceed. Which of the following represents the most appropriate risk assessment approach? Option A. Grant an immediate waiver for the missing document without further inquiry, citing potential administrative burden. Option B. Admit the applicant provisionally, assuming the document will be provided later, without establishing a clear follow-up mechanism. Option C. Attempt to contact the applicant to understand the reason for the missing document and request its submission within a specified time frame, while also assessing the potential impact of its absence. Option D. Immediately reject the application due to the missing document to maintain strict adherence to submission deadlines. Correct answer is D. Immediately reject the application due to the missing document to maintain strict adherence to submission deadlines. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the university's commitment to academic integrity with the practicalities of managing student admissions and potential resource constraints. The admissions committee must make a judgment call based on incomplete information, where a hasty decision could either unfairly disadvantage a deserving candidate or compromise the university's standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure fairness, adherence to established policies, and the long-term reputation of Adventist University of Africa. The correct approach involves a thorough risk assessment that prioritizes gathering sufficient information to make an informed decision. This means actively seeking clarification from the applicant regarding the missing documentation and understanding the reasons for its absence. This approach aligns with principles of due diligence and fairness, ensuring that all applicants are evaluated on a comparable basis and that decisions are not based on assumptions or incomplete data. Ethically, it upholds the principle of treating individuals equitably and transparently. While specific Adventist University of Africa entrance exam regulations are not provided, the general ethical imperative in academic admissions is to ensure a fair and transparent process. An incorrect approach would be to immediately reject the application due to missing documentation without attempting to obtain it. This fails to demonstrate due diligence and could lead to the exclusion of a qualified candidate, potentially violating principles of fairness and equal opportunity. Another incorrect approach would be to admit the student provisionally without any clear plan or timeline for obtaining the missing documents. This creates an unacceptable level of risk for the university, potentially admitting a student who does not meet the fundamental requirements, thereby undermining academic standards and potentially leading to future complications. A third incorrect approach would be to grant an exception without a clear, documented rationale or a review process. This could set a precedent for arbitrary decision-making and compromise the integrity of the admissions process. Professionals in admissions should employ a structured decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue, incomplete application. 2. Gathering all relevant information, contacting the applicant, reviewing existing documentation. 3. Assessing the risks and benefits of different courses of action. 4. Consulting relevant policies and guidelines, university admissions policy, any specific entrance exam regulations. 5. Making a reasoned decision based on the gathered information and established criteria. 6. Documenting the decision and the rationale behind it. Question 4. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent increase in reported student grievances related to academic advising over the past 2 semesters, with a notable spike in the most recent quarter. This trend is accompanied by a slight but steady decline in student satisfaction scores for the advising department. Considering the Adventist University of Africa's commitment to student success and its ethical framework, which of the following risk assessment approaches is most appropriate? Option A. Focus solely on the decline in satisfaction scores, assuming it is the primary indicator of risk and overlooking the specific nature of the grievances. Option B. Acknowledge the increase in grievances as a normal fluctuation in student feedback and continue to monitor the situation without immediate intervention. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive review of the academic advising department's processes, resources, and staff training, cross-referencing feedback with student academic performance data to identify root causes and potential systemic issues. Option D. Immediately reassign advising responsibilities to a different department based on the perceived negative trend, without further investigation. The correct answer is C. Initiate a comprehensive review of the academic advising department's processes, resources, and staff training, cross-referencing feedback with student academic performance data to identify root causes and potential systemic issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret data from a monitoring system and apply it to a risk assessment framework within the specific context of the Adventist University of Africa's operational and ethical guidelines. The challenge lies in moving beyond simply observing data to making a reasoned judgment about potential risks and the appropriate response, ensuring alignment with the university's mission and regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to differentiate between routine fluctuations and genuine indicators of risk that could impact the university's reputation, student welfare, or operational integrity. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of the monitoring system's output against established risk indicators and the university's risk appetite. This approach is right because it prioritizes a proactive and informed response to potential issues. By identifying deviations from normal patterns and assessing their potential impact, the university can implement targeted mitigation strategies. This aligns with principles of good governance and responsible management, ensuring that resources are allocated effectively to address genuine threats. Ethically, it demonstrates a commitment to safeguarding the university community and its assets. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the volume of data without context fails to identify meaningful trends or anomalies. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it neglects the core purpose of monitoring, which is to detect and respond to risks. Another incorrect approach that dismisses unusual patterns as insignificant without further investigation is also a failure. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and could lead to overlooking critical issues that could have serious consequences for the university. A third incorrect approach that involves immediate, drastic action based on isolated data points without proper analysis is also flawed. This can lead to misallocation of resources, unnecessary alarm, and potentially damage to morale or reputation, failing to meet the standard of reasoned and proportionate risk management. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the monitoring system's capabilities and limitations. This should be followed by defining clear risk indicators relevant to the university's context. When anomalies are detected, the process should involve data validation, root cause analysis, and impact assessment before determining the appropriate course of action. This structured approach ensures that decisions are evidence-based, proportionate, and aligned with the university's strategic objectives and ethical commitments. Question 5. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual pattern of repeated access to specific sections of the digital examination platform by an applicant, interspersed with brief periods of inactivity. This pattern deviates significantly from typical applicant engagement during a timed assessment. Considering the Adventist University of Africa's commitment to academic integrity, which of the following represents the most appropriate initial response? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's examination performance and cross-reference the observed pattern with known legitimate study techniques before any further action. Option B. Immediately disqualify the applicant based on the assumption that the pattern indicates unauthorized access to external resources. Option C. Log the observation for future reference but take no immediate action, assuming the pattern is an anomaly in the applicant's testing behavior. Option D. Initiate a formal inquiry into potential academic misconduct, requesting the applicant to provide a detailed explanation for the observed pattern. The correct answer is D. Initiate a formal inquiry into potential academic misconduct, requesting the applicant to provide a detailed explanation for the observed pattern. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the applicant to interpret the implications of a monitoring system's output in the context of academic integrity and ethical conduct, which are foundational to the Adventist University of Africa's values and entrance examination standards. The challenge lies in discerning between potential academic misconduct and legitimate, albeit unusual, learning strategies, necessitating a nuanced judgment that aligns with the university's commitment to honesty and fairness. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation into the observed patterns. This means gathering further evidence to understand the context and intent behind the monitoring system's alerts. It requires a systematic process of reviewing the evidence, considering alternative explanations, and applying the university's established policies on academic integrity and examination conduct. This approach is ethically sound and aligns with principles of due process, ensuring that any accusations of misconduct are based on substantiated facts rather than mere suspicion. It upholds the university's commitment to a fair and transparent admissions process. An incorrect approach would be to immediately assume academic misconduct based solely on the monitoring system's alerts. This bypasses the necessary steps of investigation and verification, potentially leading to an unfair judgment against an applicant. Such an approach violates the ethical principle of fairness and the regulatory expectation of due diligence in assessing candidates. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the monitoring system's alerts entirely without any form of review. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to uphold the university's responsibility to ensure the integrity of its entrance examinations. It could also indicate a disregard for the tools and processes put in place to maintain academic standards. Professionals should approach such situations by first acknowledging the information provided by the monitoring system. They should then initiate a structured investigation, which includes seeking clarification from the applicant if appropriate, reviewing any available contextual data, and consulting relevant university policies on academic integrity. The decision-making process should be guided by principles of fairness, objectivity, and adherence to established procedures, ensuring that all applicants are treated equitably and that the integrity of the examination process is maintained. Question 6. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent pattern of minor, intermittent network latency spikes during the simulated practice entrance examination sessions, occurring at irregular intervals and affecting a small percentage of test takers' ability to submit responses within the allocated time. Based on Adventist University of Africa's entrance exam risk assessment framework, which of the following represents the most appropriate initial response? Option A. Immediately halt all further simulated practice examinations and inform all registered candidates of potential technical difficulties, pending a full system overhaul. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive review of network infrastructure and security protocols to identify and rectify the root cause of the latency, documenting all findings and proposed solutions in accordance with university IT and examination integrity guidelines. Option C. Focus solely on optimizing the submission interface for faster response times, disregarding the underlying network latency as a secondary concern. Option D. Log the latency spikes as minor operational anomalies and continue with scheduled practice examinations, assuming they will not impact the actual entrance examination. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive review of network infrastructure and security protocols to identify and rectify the root cause of the latency, documenting all findings and proposed solutions in accordance with university IT and examination integrity guidelines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret data from a monitoring system and apply it to a risk assessment framework within the specific context of Adventist University of Africa's entrance examination regulations. The challenge lies in moving beyond simply observing data to making a reasoned judgment about potential risks and the appropriate response, all while adhering to the university's established guidelines. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between normal operational fluctuations and genuine indicators of potential issues that could compromise the integrity of the examination process. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of the observed anomalies against the university's defined risk parameters for its entrance examinations. This means identifying deviations from expected patterns, categorizing them based on their potential impact, e.g., minor technical glitches versus evidence of potential malpractice, and then determining if the observed data triggers any predefined risk mitigation protocols or necessitates further investigation, as per the Adventist University of Africa's examination guidelines. This approach is ethically sound and professionally responsible, as it prioritizes the fairness and integrity of the entrance examination process, a core tenet of academic institutions. It aligns with the implicit regulatory expectation that examination bodies will proactively manage risks to ensure a valid and reliable assessment. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate technical troubleshooting without considering the broader implications for examination integrity fails to address the risk assessment aspect. This could lead to overlooking potential breaches of examination rules or security, thus undermining the fairness of the process. Another incorrect approach, which involves ignoring the anomalies altogether due to a belief that they are insignificant, represents a failure in due diligence and a disregard for the potential for even minor issues to escalate or indicate underlying problems. This approach neglects the proactive risk management expected of any examination administrator. Finally, an approach that immediately escalates every minor fluctuation as a major security breach, without proper analysis or context, demonstrates poor judgment and an inability to differentiate between routine operational noise and genuine threats, potentially leading to unnecessary disruption and resource misallocation. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with data observation, followed by contextualization within the specific regulatory framework of Adventist University of Africa's entrance exams. This involves comparing observed data against established benchmarks and risk indicators. If anomalies are detected, the next step is to assess their potential impact and likelihood of occurrence. Based on this assessment, appropriate actions are then determined, ranging from routine system checks to more in-depth investigations or reporting, always in accordance with the university's established procedures and ethical obligations to maintain examination integrity. Question 7. The monitoring system demonstrates a tendency to focus exclusively on academic misconduct incidents that have occurred in the past 3 years, neglecting potential risks related to cybersecurity vulnerabilities and student mental health support gaps. Which of the following risk assessment approaches would be most appropriate for the Adventist University of Africa entrance exam context? Option A. Broadly identifying potential risks across all university operations, including academic integrity, student welfare, financial stability, and data security, and developing monitoring strategies for each. Option B. Implementing a confidential reporting system for students to anonymously report any perceived risks without further analysis or categorization of these reports. Option C. Prioritizing the development of advanced intrusion detection systems for the university's IT infrastructure, assuming this is the most significant emerging risk. Option D. Expanding the monitoring system to include all past incidents of misconduct, regardless of the time frame, to build a more comprehensive historical database. The correct answer is A. Broadly identifying potential risks across all university operations, including academic integrity, student welfare, financial stability, and data security, and developing monitoring strategies for each. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for robust risk assessment with the practicalities of implementing and maintaining a monitoring system within an academic institution. The challenge lies in identifying potential risks that could impact the university's operations, reputation, or student welfare, and then translating those risks into actionable monitoring strategies. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the monitoring system is comprehensive without being overly burdensome or intrusive, and that it aligns with the university's mission and values. The correct approach involves a systematic and proactive identification of potential risks across various university functions, such as academic integrity, student safety, financial management, and data security. This approach necessitates engaging relevant stakeholders, including faculty, administration, and students, to gain a holistic understanding of potential vulnerabilities. The regulatory and ethical justification stems from the university's responsibility to provide a safe, secure, and academically sound environment for its community. Adhering to best practices in risk management, which are often implicitly or explicitly guided by institutional policies and potentially broader educational accreditation standards, ensures that the university can anticipate and mitigate threats effectively, thereby safeguarding its stakeholders and its reputation. An approach that focuses solely on historical data without considering emerging threats is ethically and regulatorily deficient. It fails to meet the proactive duty of care expected of an educational institution. Relying only on readily available data without seeking input from diverse university departments or student bodies leads to an incomplete risk profile, potentially overlooking critical vulnerabilities. This can result in a failure to comply with implicit or explicit institutional policies on due diligence and risk mitigation, and could expose the university to unforeseen crises. Another incorrect approach is to implement monitoring mechanisms that are overly intrusive or violate student privacy. While risk assessment is crucial, it must be conducted within ethical boundaries and in accordance with any applicable data protection guidelines or university policies. Such an approach would not only be ethically unsound, but could also lead to legal repercussions and damage the trust between the university and its students. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the university's operational landscape and its strategic objectives. This involves a multi-stakeholder consultation process to identify a broad spectrum of potential risks. Following identification, risks should be analyzed for their likelihood and potential impact. Subsequently, appropriate monitoring strategies should be designed, ensuring they are proportionate, ethical, and aligned with regulatory expectations and institutional policies. Regular review and adaptation of the monitoring system are essential to address evolving risks. Question 8. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual pattern of late submissions and multiple attempts on online quizzes by a cohort of students. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for risk assessment with the university's ethical obligations? Option A. focus solely on the technical performance of the monitoring system to ensure its accuracy, without investigating the specific student behaviors flagged. Option B. Disregard the monitoring data entirely, as it may be prone to false positives and could create an atmosphere of distrust among students. Option C. Conduct a thorough, contextualized review of the observed patterns, considering potential underlying causes such as technical difficulties, personal challenges, or legitimate learning strategies, before escalating any concerns. Option D. Initiate immediate disciplinary proceedings against all students exhibiting these patterns, assuming academic dishonesty. The correct answer is D. Initiate immediate disciplinary proceedings against all students exhibiting these patterns, assuming academic dishonesty. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for robust risk assessment with the ethical imperative of data privacy and the university's commitment to academic integrity. The monitoring system, while intended to identify potential risks, could inadvertently infringe upon student privacy or create an environment of suspicion, impacting the learning atmosphere. Careful judgment is required to ensure that risk assessment practices are both effective and ethically sound, aligning with the Adventist University of Africa's values and any applicable regulations governing educational institutions and data handling. Correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the monitoring system's outputs, focusing on identifying patterns and anomalies that genuinely indicate a risk to academic integrity or student well-being, while simultaneously ensuring that individual student data is handled with the utmost confidentiality and in accordance with established university policies and any relevant data protection guidelines. This approach prioritizes a balanced perspective, using data for legitimate risk mitigation without compromising privacy or fostering an overly punitive environment. It aligns with ethical principles of fairness, respect for individuals, and responsible data stewardship. An approach that immediately flags all deviations from typical behavior for disciplinary action is incorrect because it fails to consider context and may lead to unfair accusations, damaging student morale and the university's reputation. This approach neglects the principle of proportionality in risk management and can be seen as overly punitive, potentially violating principles of natural justice if individuals are penalized without a thorough, contextualized investigation. An approach that dismisses all monitoring data as potentially biased or unreliable is also incorrect. While acknowledging potential biases is important, completely disregarding data that could genuinely highlight risks to academic integrity or student safety would be a failure in due diligence and risk management. This approach abdicates responsibility for proactive risk identification and mitigation, potentially leaving the university vulnerable to more significant issues. An approach that focuses solely on technical aspects of the monitoring system without considering its impact on the student body or its alignment with university values is incomplete. Risk assessment in an educational context must be holistic, encompassing not only technical efficacy, but also ethical implications, student welfare, and the overall educational mission. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-stakeholder approach, including input from academic staff, IT security, student representatives, and ethics committees. It requires a clear understanding of the university's mission and values, coupled with a thorough knowledge of relevant ethical guidelines and any applicable regulatory frameworks concerning data privacy and academic conduct. The process should emphasize transparency, fairness, and a commitment to continuous improvement in risk management practices. Question 9. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of unusually high rates of late submission of required documentation for a specific cohort of international applicants, coupled with a slight increase in requests for extensions on initial academic assessments from students within that same cohort. What is the most appropriate initial step to assess the potential risks to the university's admissions integrity and student support services? Option A. Assume the system is generating false positives due to the complexity of international applicant data and disregard the flagged pattern. Option B. Immediately flag the cohort for potential academic dishonesty and initiate a review of all their submitted documents. Option C. Conduct a preliminary review of the late submissions and extension requests to identify common themes or potential systemic issues, and consult relevant university policies before escalating. Option D. Inform the admissions committee of a potential data error in the monitoring system and request a system recalibration. The correct answer is B. Immediately flag the cohort for potential academic dishonesty and initiate a review of all their submitted documents. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret data from a monitoring system and make a judgment about potential risks to the university's academic integrity and operational efficiency. The challenge lies in distinguishing between minor deviations that are within acceptable parameters and significant anomalies that warrant further investigation or intervention, all while adhering to the university's internal policies and ethical standards for academic admissions and student support. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based evaluation of the identified anomalies. This means not jumping to conclusions, but rather gathering more information to understand the context and potential causes of the deviations. It requires a balanced perspective, acknowledging that monitoring systems can flag issues that may have benign explanations, while also recognizing the importance of addressing genuine risks. This approach aligns with principles of due diligence and responsible stewardship of the university's resources and reputation. Ethically, it upholds fairness to applicants and students by ensuring decisions are based on thorough review, not assumption. An approach that immediately assumes misconduct or initiates punitive measures without further investigation is ethically flawed. It risks penalizing individuals unfairly and can damage the university's reputation for fairness and due process. It fails to adhere to the principle of natural justice, which dictates that individuals should have the opportunity to explain their circumstances before adverse decisions are made. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the anomalies altogether, assuming they are insignificant or that the system is prone to false positives. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to uphold the university's responsibility to maintain academic standards and operational integrity. It could lead to undetected breaches of policy or systemic issues that, if left unaddressed, could have more serious consequences later. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Acknowledging the data presented by the monitoring system. 2. Initiating a fact-finding process to gather context and additional information regarding the anomalies. 3. Consulting relevant university policies and guidelines pertaining to admission, student conduct, and data interpretation. 4. Evaluating the findings objectively, considering potential explanations and their implications. 5. Determining the appropriate course of action based on the evidence, which might range from further inquiry to policy review or, if warranted, disciplinary action, always ensuring fairness and adherence to established procedures. Question 10. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent pattern of lower engagement with online learning resources among first-year students in the Faculty of Health Sciences compared to other faculties. Which of the following risk assessment approaches is most appropriate for Adventist University of Africa to address this observation? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the online learning platform's usability and accessibility for first-year health sciences students, alongside targeted surveys to understand their specific challenges and preferences, and subsequently develop tailored support materials and training sessions. Option B. Advise the Faculty of Health Sciences to reduce the reliance on online learning resources for first-year students and revert to more traditional teaching methods to mitigate potential engagement issues. Option C. Immediately allocate additional funding to the general student support services across all faculties, assuming a universal need for increased assistance without specific identification of the problem's scope. Option D. Dismiss the observed pattern as a minor deviation, attributing it to individual student differences, and continue with the current resource allocation strategy. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the online learning platform's usability and accessibility for first-year health sciences students, alongside targeted surveys to understand their specific challenges and preferences, and subsequently develop tailored support materials and training sessions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient resource allocation with the ethical imperative to ensure all students receive adequate support, particularly in an academic setting like Adventist University of Africa. The risk assessment approach is crucial here to proactively identify potential issues and develop mitigation strategies before they negatively impact student learning or the university's reputation. Careful judgment is needed to interpret the monitoring data and determine the most appropriate course of action. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of the monitoring data to identify specific areas of concern and then developing targeted interventions. This aligns with the principles of good governance and academic stewardship expected within educational institutions. By focusing on data-driven decision-making, the university can ensure that resources are directed where they are most needed, thereby enhancing the overall student experience and academic outcomes. This proactive and analytical approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes student welfare and academic integrity. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the data or to implement broad, unfocused interventions without understanding the root causes. For instance, simply increasing general tutoring hours without identifying which subjects or student groups are struggling would be inefficient and potentially ineffective. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the data as insignificant without further investigation, which could lead to overlooking critical issues that might hinder student success and compromise the university's commitment to providing quality education. Such actions would fail to meet the ethical standards of responsible academic management and could lead to a decline in academic performance and student satisfaction. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the scope and limitations of the monitoring system. They should then analyze the data to identify trends and anomalies, correlating these with potential contributing factors. Based on this analysis, they should formulate specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART interventions. Regular review and evaluation of the effectiveness of these interventions are also critical components of a robust decision-making process. Question 11. Process analysis reveals that Adventist University of Africa is developing its entrance examination procedures. To ensure the integrity and fairness of the exam, which of the following risk assessment approaches is most appropriate for identifying and mitigating potential issues? Option A. Relying on the assumption that all applicants will adhere to ethical conduct, thus requiring minimal security measures. Option B. Requiring candidates to submit an extensive portfolio of personal documents, including birth certificates and parental consent forms, to verify identity. Option C. A comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential threats to exam integrity, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and develops proportionate mitigation strategies, aligned with university policies and educational standards. Option D. Implementing the most technologically advanced proctoring software available, regardless of cost or accessibility for all candidates. The correct answer is C. A comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential threats to exam integrity, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and develops proportionate mitigation strategies, aligned with university policies and educational standards. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in risk assessment for a university entrance exam, specifically concerning the integrity of the examination process. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for robust security measures to prevent academic dishonesty with the imperative to ensure a fair and accessible examination experience for all prospective students. Overly stringent measures could deter legitimate candidates, while insufficient measures could compromise the validity of the results and the reputation of Adventist University of Africa. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate risks without creating undue barriers. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and multifaceted risk assessment that considers various potential threats to exam integrity, such as impersonation, cheating, and technical failures. This approach prioritizes identifying vulnerabilities, evaluating the likelihood and impact of each risk, and then developing proportionate mitigation strategies. For Adventist University of Africa, this would involve adhering to its own internal policies and any relevant national educational accreditation standards that mandate fair and secure examination practices. The ethical justification lies in upholding academic integrity, ensuring fairness to all applicants, and safeguarding the university's reputation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing overly restrictive identity verification methods that are not proportionate to the identified risks, such as requiring multiple forms of highly specific, difficult-to-obtain identification that could exclude eligible candidates, fails to consider accessibility and fairness. This approach risks alienating potential students and may not be aligned with the university's mission to provide educational opportunities. Focusing solely on technological solutions for exam proctoring without considering the digital divide or potential for technical glitches for candidates in diverse locations is an incomplete risk assessment. This overlooks the practical realities faced by some applicants and could lead to unfair disadvantages, violating principles of equity in admissions. Adopting a laissez-faire attitude towards exam security, assuming that candidates will act ethically, represents a failure to proactively identify and mitigate foreseeable risks. This approach neglects the university's responsibility to maintain academic standards and could lead to widespread academic misconduct, undermining the credibility of the entrance examination and the institution. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with developing and administering university entrance exams should employ a structured risk management framework. This involves clearly defining the scope of the assessment, identifying all potential risks to exam integrity and fairness, analyzing the likelihood and impact of each risk, and then selecting and implementing appropriate control measures. The decision-making process should be guided by established principles of academic integrity, fairness, equity, and adherence to the university's own policies and any applicable national educational guidelines. Regular review and adaptation of the risk assessment are crucial to address evolving threats and ensure the ongoing validity of the examination process. Question 12. The performance metrics show a projected decline in operating surplus for the upcoming fiscal year, necessitating a review of financial strategies. Which of the following represents the most prudent and ethically sound approach for the university administration to consider? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of operational expenditures for potential efficiencies and explore diversified revenue streams through strategic partnerships and enhanced alumni engagement. Option B. Seek an immediate emergency loan from external financial institutions without first assessing internal financial management options. Option C. Implement a significant increase in tuition fees across all programs to immediately address the projected shortfall. Option D. Propose substantial cuts to academic departments and research funding to reduce immediate costs. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of operational expenditures for potential efficiencies and explore diversified revenue streams through strategic partnerships and enhanced alumni engagement. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the university's financial sustainability with its core mission of providing accessible education. The performance metrics, while indicating a potential shortfall, do not inherently dictate a single course of action. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any decisions made align with the university's ethical obligations and regulatory compliance within the context of Adventist University of Africa's operational framework. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of operational efficiencies and potential revenue enhancements that do not compromise educational quality or accessibility. This aligns with principles of responsible financial stewardship and a commitment to the university's mission. Specifically, it requires exploring internal cost-saving measures and diversified income streams, such as grants, partnerships, or alumni engagement, which are ethically sound and generally permissible under educational governance guidelines. The focus is on sustainable growth and operational excellence, ensuring long-term viability without resorting to measures that could negatively impact students or the institution's reputation. An approach that immediately proposes significant tuition increases without exploring alternatives fails to consider the potential negative impact on student enrollment and accessibility, which is a core ethical consideration for an educational institution. This could also contravene any internal policies or external guidelines that emphasize affordability. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on drastic budget cuts to academic programs, risks undermining the quality of education and the university's core purpose. Such a measure, without a thorough impact assessment and stakeholder consultation, could be seen as a failure to uphold the university's commitment to its students and faculty, potentially violating implicit or explicit promises regarding program offerings and academic standards. A third incorrect approach, seeking external emergency funding without first exhausting internal solutions, might be perceived as a lack of proactive financial management and could lead to unfavorable loan terms or dependencies that compromise institutional autonomy. Responsible financial management dictates that internal resources and efficiencies should be maximized before seeking external, potentially costly, solutions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data-driven analysis, ethical considerations, and stakeholder impact. This involves 1. Understanding the full scope of the performance metrics and their implications. 2. Identifying and evaluating a range of potential solutions, considering their financial, ethical, and operational consequences. 3. Consulting with relevant stakeholders, including faculty, staff, students, and governing bodies. 4. Selecting the solution that best balances financial prudence with the university's mission and ethical commitments, ensuring transparency and accountability throughout the process. Question 13. The audit findings indicate a significant disparity in the allocation of academic support resources across different departments, with some departments receiving substantially more than others, despite comparable student enrollment numbers and program complexity. What is the most appropriate next step for the university administration? Option A. Reallocate resources immediately to equalize the distribution across all departments, regardless of specific needs or program requirements. Option B. Initiate a thorough review of the current resource allocation methodology, examining the criteria used, departmental needs assessments, and the impact on student support services and academic outcomes. Option C. Implement across-the-board budget cuts for all departments to address perceived inefficiencies. Option D. Classify the findings as a minor administrative issue and focus on other pressing operational matters. The correct answer is B. Initiate a thorough review of the current resource allocation methodology, examining the criteria used, departmental needs assessments, and the impact on student support services and academic outcomes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient resource allocation with the ethical imperative to ensure all students receive adequate support for their academic success, particularly in the context of an entrance exam designed to assess readiness for higher education. The audit findings highlight a potential systemic issue that could disproportionately affect certain student demographics or academic programs if not addressed proactively. Careful judgment is required to identify the root cause of the identified resource disparities and to implement solutions that are both effective and equitable. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the resource allocation process, focusing on identifying the underlying reasons for the observed disparities. This includes analyzing the criteria used for resource distribution, assessing the actual needs of different academic departments and student support services, and considering the potential impact of these allocations on student outcomes. The justification for this approach lies in its commitment to fairness, transparency, and evidence-based decision-making, aligning with the principles of good governance and academic integrity expected within an educational institution. Specifically, it addresses the audit's concern by seeking to understand and rectify any systemic biases or inefficiencies that might be hindering equitable access to essential academic resources. This proactive and analytical stance is crucial for maintaining the credibility and effectiveness of the university's admissions and support systems. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit findings as mere statistical anomalies without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge the potential for systemic issues that could impact student success and the university's reputation. It also neglects the ethical responsibility to ensure equitable opportunities for all prospective students. Another incorrect approach would be to implement immediate, superficial changes to resource allocation without understanding the root causes. This could lead to unintended consequences, such as shifting the problem to another area or creating new inefficiencies. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to address the core issues identified by the audit. A third incorrect approach would be to focus solely on cost-cutting measures in response to the audit, without considering the impact on essential student support services or academic programs. This prioritizes financial expediency over the educational mission and the well-being of students, potentially undermining the university's ability to attract and retain qualified candidates. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understanding the findings and their potential implications. Second, gathering additional data and conducting a root cause analysis. Third, developing and evaluating potential solutions based on their effectiveness, equity, and feasibility. And finally, implementing the chosen solution with clear communication and ongoing monitoring to ensure its success. Question 14. Upon reviewing an applicant's academic transcripts for the Adventist University of Africa entrance exam, the admissions committee notes that the applicant's previous institution is located in a region with a reputation for less rigorous academic standards compared to other applicants. The committee is tasked with assessing the applicant's risk of academic underperformance. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional and ethical admissions practices? Option A. Focus primarily on the reputation of the applicant's previous institution and assign a lower score for academic preparedness, regardless of other application components. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's entire application, including all academic records, personal statements, and any supplementary materials. And if any concerns arise regarding the rigor of their previous institution, seek additional information or context from the applicant or the institution before making a final determination. Option C. Immediately flag the applicant as high risk due to the perceived lower academic standards of their previous institution and consider their application for a less competitive program. Option D. Request a standardized test score from the applicant that is significantly higher than the typical range to compensate for the perceived weakness of their prior education. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's entire application, including all academic records, personal statements, and any supplementary materials. And if any concerns arise regarding the rigor of their previous institution, seek additional information or context from the applicant or the institution before making a final determination. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the university's commitment to academic integrity with the need to provide a fair and transparent admissions process. The admissions committee must assess candidates holistically, considering their academic potential and suitability for the university's programs, while adhering to established guidelines. The challenge lies in identifying potential risks associated with a candidate's application without resorting to discriminatory practices or making assumptions based on incomplete information. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the risk assessment is objective, evidence-based, and aligned with the university's values and any applicable regulatory frameworks governing admissions. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of all provided documentation, seeking clarification where necessary, and assessing the candidate's potential against established academic and program-specific criteria. This approach is ethically sound and professionally responsible as it prioritizes a thorough and objective evaluation. It aligns with the principle of fairness by giving the candidate the opportunity to present their qualifications and for the committee to understand their background. Regulatory frameworks for university admissions, while not explicitly detailed here for this specific exam, generally emphasize merit-based selection, non-discrimination, and due process, all of which are upheld by this method. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the perceived difficulty of the candidate's previous educational system without further investigation fails to acknowledge the diversity of educational backgrounds and may lead to an unfair assessment. This approach risks introducing bias and overlooks the candidate's potential to succeed. It is ethically problematic as it relies on stereotypes rather than individual merit. Another incorrect approach, which involves immediately rejecting the application based on a single piece of potentially ambiguous information, bypasses the due diligence required in admissions. This demonstrates a lack of professional rigor and a failure to uphold the university's commitment to a fair evaluation process. It also fails to consider the possibility of extenuating circumstances or alternative interpretations of the information. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a systematic evaluation of all available information, a commitment to objectivity, and a willingness to seek further clarification. Professionals should be aware of their own potential biases and actively work to mitigate them. When faced with ambiguity, the default should be to investigate further and gather more evidence rather than making hasty judgments. Adherence to established university policies and ethical guidelines is paramount. Question 15. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a new, potentially lucrative online program could significantly increase revenue for the Adventist University of Africa, but it requires substantial upfront investment and introduces new operational complexities. which approach best balances the financial opportunity with the university's mission and ethical responsibilities. Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that evaluates not only financial viability, but also potential impacts on academic quality, student experience, reputational integrity, and alignment with the university's core values and mission, developing mitigation strategies for identified risks before final approval. Option B. Prioritize the program's implementation due to its strong revenue potential, deferring detailed risk assessment until after the program is operational to address issues as they arise. Option C. Focus solely on the financial projections, as increased revenue is essential for the university's growth and ability to fulfill its mission, with other considerations being secondary. Option D. Proceed with the program if the projected revenue increase demonstrably outweighs the initial investment and ongoing operational costs, assuming minimal regulatory hurdles. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the program if the projected revenue increase demonstrably outweighs the initial investment and ongoing operational costs, assuming minimal regulatory hurdles. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial benefits of a new program against potential long-term risks and the university's core mission. The Adventist University of Africa, as an educational institution with a specific ethical and religious foundation, must ensure that any new initiative aligns with its values and does not compromise its academic integrity or student well-being. Careful judgment is required to avoid prioritizing profit over purpose. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that goes beyond purely financial metrics. This approach is right because it acknowledges that educational institutions have a fiduciary duty to their students, staff, and stakeholders, which includes safeguarding their reputation and ensuring the quality of education. Regulatory frameworks for educational institutions, even if not explicitly detailed here, generally mandate responsible governance, ethical conduct, and a commitment to the institution's stated mission. A thorough risk assessment, considering ethical implications, reputational damage, and alignment with the university's values, is therefore a professional and ethical imperative. This aligns with the principle of responsible stewardship of institutional resources and reputation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the projected financial gains without adequately considering the potential negative impacts is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a narrow interpretation of cost-benefit analysis that neglects non-quantifiable but critical factors. Such an approach could lead to regulatory breaches if it violates guidelines on institutional integrity or ethical conduct. It also represents an ethical failure by potentially exposing the university to reputational damage, compromising student experience, or deviating from its core mission, all of which are implicitly protected by the ethical standards expected of educational bodies. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes expediency over thoroughness, such as rushing the implementation without proper due diligence, is also professionally unsound. This bypasses essential risk mitigation steps and could lead to unforeseen problems that are more costly to resolve later. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of diligence and responsibility towards the institution and its stakeholders. The professional decision-making process for similar situation should involve a multifaceted evaluation. This includes 1. Clearly defining the objectives of the proposed initiative. 2. Identifying all potential risks, both financial and non-financial, e.g., reputational, ethical, operational, academic. 3. Assessing the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. 4. Developing mitigation strategies for significant risks. 5. Evaluating the benefits against the net costs, including risk mitigation costs. 6. Ensuring alignment with the university's mission, values, and any applicable regulatory or accreditation standards. 7. Seeking input from relevant stakeholders. This systematic process ensures that decisions are well-informed, responsible, and aligned with the institution's long-term sustainability and ethical obligations. Question 16. The assessment process reveals a candidate with excellent academic scores but a documented instance of plagiarism in a prior academic setting. The admissions committee must decide how to proceed. Which of the following represents the most appropriate risk assessment approach? Option A. Admit the candidate without any further inquiry or conditions, assuming the past incident was an isolated mistake. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the plagiarism incident. Request a detailed explanation from the candidate and consider the context and severity of the infraction before making a decision, potentially with probationary conditions. Option C. Seek to downplay or omit the plagiarism incident from the candidate's file to avoid potential complications in the admissions decision. Option D. Immediately reject the candidate's application due to the past academic misconduct, regardless of other qualifications. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the plagiarism incident, request a detailed explanation from the candidate, and consider the context and severity of the infraction before making a decision, potentially with probationary conditions. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a candidate with a strong academic record, but a history of academic misconduct at a previous institution. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the university's commitment to admitting qualified students with its responsibility to uphold academic integrity and maintain a fair admissions process for all applicants. A thorough risk assessment is crucial to identify potential risks associated with admitting such a candidate and to determine the appropriate course of action. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the previous academic misconduct, seeking clarification from the candidate, and considering the severity and context of the past infraction. This aligns with the Adventist University of Africa's commitment to ethical conduct and academic excellence, as outlined in its admissions policies and the broader ethical guidelines governing educational institutions. Specifically, it reflects a principle of fairness and due process, allowing the candidate an opportunity to explain their past actions while also ensuring the university's standards are protected. This approach prioritizes a holistic evaluation, considering both academic merit and character. An incorrect approach would be to automatically reject the candidate based solely on the past misconduct without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge the possibility of rehabilitation or extenuating circumstances, and could be seen as overly punitive, potentially violating principles of fairness. Another incorrect approach would be to admit the candidate without any further scrutiny or conditions, ignoring the documented risk of academic dishonesty. This would undermine the university's commitment to academic integrity and could set a precedent that compromises the value of its degrees. Finally, an approach that involves fabricating or misrepresenting information about the candidate's past to justify a decision would be a severe ethical and professional breach, violating principles of honesty and transparency. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the core ethical and regulatory principles at play, such as academic integrity, fairness, and due process. They should then gather all relevant information, provide the applicant with an opportunity to respond, and make a decision based on a balanced consideration of the evidence and the university's policies. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are well-informed, defensible, and aligned with the institution's values. Question 17. Examination of the data shows that a prospective student for the Adventist University of Africa has submitted an incomplete set of entrance examination documents, citing a sudden family emergency that prevented them from completing a required section. The applicant has otherwise demonstrated strong academic potential in their preliminary submissions. What is the most appropriate risk assessment approach in this situation? Option A. Initiate a formal review process to gather further details about the family emergency, request supporting documentation if appropriate, and assess the applicant's overall suitability for admission, considering potential alternative assessment methods for the incomplete section if policy allows. Option B. Focus the risk assessment primarily on the applicant's ability to pay tuition fees, given the potential financial strain indicated by the family emergency. Option C. Grant provisional admission based on the applicant's strong preliminary academic record, deferring the completion of the entrance examination until after enrollment. Option D. Immediately reject the application due to the incomplete documentation, as per the standard entrance examination policy. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal review process to gather further details about the family emergency, request supporting documentation if appropriate, and assess the applicant's overall suitability for admission, considering potential alternative assessment methods for the incomplete section if policy allows. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the university's commitment to academic integrity with the need to support prospective students who may face unforeseen circumstances. The core tension lies in upholding the established entrance requirements while demonstrating empathy and fairness. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between genuine hardship and attempts to circumvent the process. The correct approach involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the applicant's situation, seeking further documentation, and potentially offering alternative pathways if appropriate, all while adhering to the spirit and letter of the Adventist University of Africa's admission policies. This demonstrates a commitment to both fairness and the integrity of the admissions process, aligning with ethical principles of due process and equitable treatment. It also reflects a responsible approach to risk assessment, acknowledging that while adherence to policy is crucial, rigid application without consideration for extenuating circumstances can be detrimental. An approach that immediately rejects the application based solely on the initial documentation fails to acknowledge potential extenuating circumstances and may violate principles of fairness and equity. It prioritizes a strict, procedural interpretation of the rules over a holistic review, potentially overlooking a deserving candidate. An approach that bypasses established procedures to grant admission without proper verification risks compromising the academic standards and reputation of the Adventist University of Africa. It could set a precedent for preferential treatment and undermine the credibility of the admissions process. An approach that focuses solely on the financial implications of the applicant's situation, without adequately considering their academic preparedness or the reasons for the incomplete documentation, is ethically flawed. It prioritizes financial considerations over the primary purpose of an entrance exam, which is to assess suitability for academic study. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the established policies and guidelines. They should then gather all relevant information, assess the situation holistically, consider potential mitigating factors, and consult with relevant stakeholders or supervisors if necessary. The decision should be justifiable based on the evidence, policy, and ethical considerations, ensuring fairness, transparency, and the upholding of institutional standards. Question 18. Assessment of an applicant's suitability for the Adventist University of Africa entrance exam requires a comprehensive evaluation of their potential. Which of the following approaches best reflects a robust and ethically sound risk assessment for admissions? Option A. Primary reliance on the number of extracurricular activities listed, assuming this directly correlates with success. Option B. A holistic review considering academic transcripts, extracurricular involvement, personal essays, and references to gauge overall potential and fit. Option C. Strict adherence to a minimum standardized test score, disregarding other aspects of the applicant's profile. Option D. A subjective assessment based solely on the perceived charisma of the applicant during an interview. Correct answer is B. A holistic review considering academic transcripts, extracurricular involvement, personal essays, and references to gauge overall potential and fit. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate an understanding of risk assessment principles within the context of university admissions, specifically for the Adventist University of Africa entrance exam. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate method to evaluate potential risks associated with an applicant's profile, balancing fairness, accuracy, and adherence to the university's admission guidelines. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both comprehensive and ethically sound, avoiding biases or superficial evaluations. The correct approach involves a holistic review of the applicant's academic record, extracurricular activities, personal statement, and any supporting documents. This method is right because it aligns with best practices in admissions, aiming to identify candidates who possess not only academic potential, but also the character and commitment suitable for the Adventist University of Africa's educational environment. It allows for a nuanced understanding of the applicant's strengths and potential challenges, enabling a more informed and equitable decision. This approach is ethically justified, as it promotes fairness and avoids discriminatory practices by considering a wide range of factors beyond a single metric. An approach that focuses solely on standardized test scores is incorrect because it fails to capture the full spectrum of an applicant's capabilities and potential. This narrow focus can lead to the exclusion of otherwise qualified candidates who may excel in other areas or have unique circumstances that are not reflected in test results. Ethically, this approach risks being discriminatory by not accounting for diverse backgrounds and learning styles. An approach that prioritizes anecdotal evidence or personal recommendations without corroboration is also incorrect. While recommendations can offer valuable insights, relying on them exclusively without verifying the information or considering objective data can lead to biased decisions. This can be ethically problematic if recommendations are based on personal relationships rather than objective merit, potentially undermining the integrity of the admissions process. An approach that relies on a single, predetermined threshold for all applicants, regardless of their background or the program they are applying for, is incorrect. This rigid methodology fails to acknowledge the diversity of applicants and the varying demands of different academic programs. It can lead to unfair outcomes and does not reflect a sophisticated understanding of risk assessment, which should be adaptable and context-specific. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted evaluation. Professionals should first understand the specific objectives and values of the institution, in this case, the Adventist University of Africa. They should then identify the key criteria for admission, which typically include academic achievement, personal qualities, and potential contribution to the university community. The chosen assessment method should be robust, fair, and transparent, allowing for the consideration of diverse evidence while mitigating potential biases. Regular review and refinement of the assessment process are also crucial to ensure its continued effectiveness and ethical compliance. Question 19. Which approach would be most effective for the Adventist University of Africa to proactively identify and mitigate risks associated with academic dishonesty among its prospective students during the entrance examination process? Option A. Basing the approach on informal observations and student rumors regarding potential cheating methods. Option B. Relying solely on post-examination audits to detect instances of cheating and then applying disciplinary actions. Option C. Implementing a comprehensive risk assessment framework that includes identifying potential sources of academic dishonesty, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and developing preventative and detective control measures. Option D. Developing a set of strict penalties for any suspected academic misconduct without prior systematic risk identification. The correct answer is C. Implementing a comprehensive risk assessment framework that includes identifying potential sources of academic dishonesty, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and developing preventative and detective control measures. Explanation. The scenario presents a challenge for an applicant to the Adventist University of Africa entrance exam, requiring them to demonstrate an understanding of risk assessment principles within the context of academic integrity and institutional reputation. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate method to proactively identify and mitigate potential risks associated with academic dishonesty, which could undermine the university's standing and the value of its degrees. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both effective and ethically sound. Aligning with the university's values, the correct approach involves a comprehensive and proactive risk assessment framework that systematically identifies potential threats to academic integrity, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and develops mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of good governance and institutional management, ensuring that the university maintains high academic standards. Ethically, it demonstrates a commitment to fairness and the integrity of the educational process for all students. Regulatory frameworks for educational institutions, while not explicitly detailed for this exam's jurisdiction, generally emphasize the importance of robust internal controls and risk management to safeguard academic quality and reputation. An approach that focuses solely on reactive measures, such as only investigating cases after they occur, is insufficient. This fails to proactively address the root causes of academic dishonesty and can lead to a perception that such behavior is not taken seriously, potentially increasing its prevalence. It also places a significant burden on resources when issues escalate. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on anecdotal evidence or assumptions without a structured assessment. This lacks the rigor necessary for effective risk management and can lead to misallocation of resources or the implementation of ineffective controls. It also fails to provide a clear basis for decision-making and can be perceived as arbitrary. A third incorrect approach might be to implement overly punitive measures without a clear understanding of the underlying issues. While deterrence is important, a purely punitive strategy without educational components or a nuanced understanding of why students engage in academic dishonesty can be counterproductive and may not address the systemic factors contributing to the problem. It also risks alienating students and creating a climate of fear, rather than fostering a culture of academic integrity. The professional reasoning process for similar situations involves a systematic approach. First, clearly defining the objective, e.g., maintaining academic integrity. Second, identifying potential risks that could hinder achieving that objective. Third, assessing the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. Fourth, developing and implementing appropriate control measures to mitigate those risks. And finally, regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment and control measures. This iterative process ensures that the institution remains vigilant and adaptable to evolving challenges. Question 20. Implementation of a risk assessment framework for the Adventist University of Africa entrance examination process requires careful consideration of various applicant profiles. Which of the following approaches best balances academic rigor with equitable access and ethical admissions practices? Option A. A strict adherence to a minimum pass mark on the entrance examination, automatically disqualifying any applicant who falls below this threshold, regardless of other qualifications. Option B. A comprehensive risk assessment that considers a combination of entrance examination performance, previous academic records, and a personal statement to gauge an applicant's potential and suitability for university study. Option C. Relying solely on the entrance examination score as the sole determinant of an applicant's admission, without any supplementary assessment or consideration of extenuating circumstances. Option D. Prioritizing the admission of applicants with the highest entrance examination scores, with minimal consideration for other factors that might indicate their potential or fit with the university. The correct answer is B. A comprehensive risk assessment that considers a combination of entrance examination performance, previous academic records, and a personal statement to gauge an applicant's potential and suitability for university study. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the university's commitment to academic integrity with the practicalities of admitting students who may present varying levels of risk. The entrance exam process, particularly the risk assessment component, is critical for ensuring that admitted students have the foundational knowledge and potential to succeed, thereby safeguarding the university's academic standards and reputation. A robust risk assessment process is not merely administrative. It is an ethical imperative to ensure fairness to all applicants and to maintain the value of the degrees awarded by Adventist University of Africa. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted risk assessment that considers a range of factors beyond a single test score. This approach aligns with best practices in educational admissions and ethical considerations by acknowledging that a student's potential is not solely defined by one examination. It allows for a more nuanced understanding of an applicant's capabilities, including their background, motivation, and any extenuating circumstances. This holistic view is ethically sound as it promotes fairness and equal opportunity, and it is regulatorily prudent as it supports the university's mission to provide quality education to a diverse student body, provided it is conducted transparently and consistently according to established university policies. An approach that relies solely on a minimum pass mark for the entrance exam is ethically flawed because it fails to account for individual differences and potential. It can unfairly exclude capable students who may have had a poor performance on a single day due to various reasons, such as anxiety or a lack of familiarity with the specific test format, without considering other indicators of their academic promise. This rigid approach can be seen as discriminatory and contrary to the principles of equitable access to education, an approach that prioritizes admitting students with the highest scores without any further assessment of their suitability for specific programs or their potential to benefit from the university's offerings is also problematic. While high scores are desirable, they do not guarantee success or a good fit with the university's ethos and academic environment. This approach risks admitting students who may not be genuinely committed or who may struggle with the demands of higher education, potentially leading to higher attrition rates and a dilution of academic standards. It overlooks the ethical responsibility to ensure that admitted students are likely to thrive and contribute positively to the university community. A professional decision-making process for such situations should involve establishing clear, transparent, and fair admission criteria that are regularly reviewed and updated. This process should incorporate a risk assessment framework that considers multiple indicators of student potential, including academic records, personal statements, interviews, and standardized test scores, where applicable. The university should have a well-defined appeals process for applicants who believe their assessment was unfair. Furthermore, ongoing monitoring of student success post-admission can provide valuable feedback for refining the admission and risk assessment processes.